They called her worthless, a discarded piece of a much grander puzzle. For years, Amelia Hayes believed them. Her ex-husband, Richard Sterling, had chiseled the word into her very soul, leaving her a hollowed-out shell of the woman she once was. But what happens when the one person society dismisses is seen as a priceless treasure by a man who owns the world? This is the story of how a forgotten ex-wife left with nothing but shattered dreams found herself in the arms of a reclusive billionaire, Adrian Thorne, who didn't just give her a new life. He gave her a crown. The silence in Amelia Hayes's small apartment was a living thing. It breathed in the scent of turpentine and old paper that clung to her clothes and filled the spaces where a husband's laughter used to be, or more accurately, where his criticisms used to echo. It had been 2 years since the divorce, 2 years since Richard Sterling had surgically removed her from his pristine, upwardly mobile life, declaring her an uninspired, worthless accessory he could no longer afford to be seen with. The words had been his parting gift, delivered with the same casual cruelty he employed when returning a slightly overcooked steak at a restaurant. Amelia traced the delicate fracture line on a porcelain teacup she was restoring. The piece, a late 18th century Meissen, was far more valuable than anything else in her cramped Boston walk-up. It was a commission from a small antique shop in Beacon Hill, one of the few places that recognized her rare talent. To her the cup was a kindred spirit. Broken, discarded, but with a history and an inherent beauty that only a patient hand could reveal. Her work was a quiet rebellion against Richard's narrative. He had always sneered at her dusty hobbies, urging her to focus on more socially acceptable pursuits like hosting vapid dinner parties or chairing meaningless charity committees. Her passion for history, for the stories objects held, was in his eyes a character flaw. "You spend more time with dead people's junk than with me." Amelia, he'd once said, gesturing dismissively at the 19th century secretaire she'd lovingly brought back from the brink of ruin. "It's common. It's a commoner's pastime." Now his voice was a ghost that haunted the quiet apartment, a constant, insidious whisper that fed her deepest insecurities. She saw his judgment in the tired reflection that stared back from the window pane, a woman of 34 with sorrow in her eyes and hands stained with varnish. She had given him the best decade of her life, molding herself into the perfect corporate wife. She'd learned about stock portfolios, feigned interest in golf, and smiled placidly at his lecherous business partners. In return, he had taken her confidence, her friends who had all been his friends, she realized too late, and her sense of self. The divorce settlement had been insultingly small, a calculated move to ensure she would struggle. And she did. Part-time at the antique shop, freelance restoration work, and a crushing weight of student debt from an art history degree she'd never been allowed to use professionally. Some days the ghost of his voice won. She would stare at a half-finished project, the intricate work blurring through a film of tears, and the word would surface from the depths of her memory, worthless. On those days she would put down her tools, wrap herself in a threadbare blanket, and let the silence swallow her whole. Today was one of those days. A letter had arrived that morning, a crisp, cream-colored envelope bearing the opulent crest of Sterling and Vanguard Richards investment firm. It was an invitation. Not for her, of course, but a generic announcement of his engagement to a woman named Cassandra Vanderbilt. The name alone felt like a slap. It was old money, a name that dripped with the prestige Richard had always craved. The accompanying photo in the society pages online showed them on a yacht in Monaco, Richard tanned and smugly triumphant. Cassandra, a blonde polished jewel, 25 years of age, her smile as bright and empty as a showroom. Amelia crumpled the announcement in her fist, the sharp edges of the cardstock digging into her palm. She could hear him so clearly. "You see, Amelia, this is what a successful man has by his side, not a mousy little hobbyist who smells of wood glue." The porcelain teacup sat on her workbench, its delicate floral pattern a stark contrast to the ugliness coiling in her gut. She had been so careful with it, spending hours meticulously cleaning the fracture, preparing the adhesive. Now she wanted to smash it. She wanted to hurl it against the wall and watch it explode into 1,000 irreparable pieces, a reflection of how she felt inside. But she didn't. Instead, She took a deep shuddering breath, the scent of turpentine a strangely grounding anchor. Smashing it would be giving in. It would be an admission of defeat, a confirmation of Richard's verdict. With trembling hands she picked up a fine-tipped brush, dipped it in a tiny pot of gold-leaf paint, and began the delicate art of kintsugi, the Japanese method of repairing broken pottery with lacquer dusted or mixed with powdered gold. She wasn't just fixing the cup. She was highlighting its brokenness, transforming its scars into a testament of its history, its resilience. As she traced the fracture with a shimmering line of gold, a quiet resolve settled over her. Richard had tried to break her, to discard her like a flawed piece of china. He had told her she was worthless. But here in the quiet solitude of her apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, Amelia Hayes was slowly, painstakingly putting herself back together, one golden seam at a time. She just didn't know that someone was about to see the value not in the repaired object, but in the artist who held the brush. The Chandler collection was less of an auction house and more of a sanctuary for the world's most coveted artifacts. Tucked away on a quiet cobblestone street in Boston's historic district, it operated on a level of discretion that made its more famous competitors seem like garish department stores. There were no public viewings, no glossy catalogs mailed to the masses. One received an invitation or one did not. Amelia was only there because the owner, a crotchety but brilliant historian named Mr. Abernathy, occasionally hired her for her expertise in authenticating and restoring antique manuscripts. That Tuesday, she was hunched over a collection of 16th-century letters, her brow furrowed in concentration as she examined the watermarks on the delicate parchment. The air was thick with the scent of aged leather and beeswax polish. It was her haven. Ms. Hayes. Mr. Abernathy's gruff voice cut through her focus. A client requires a consultation. The gallery. Amelia looked up, surprised. Clients at the Chandler collection rarely interacted with freelance staff. They dealt with Mr. Abernathy and his impeccably tailored account managers. Wiping her hands on her linen apron, she followed him out of the archives and into the main viewing gallery. The room was hushed, dominated by a massive Flemish tapestry and glass cases holding impossibly rare items. A single man stood with his back to them, studying a display of medieval astronomical instruments. He was tall and lean-dressed in a simple dark gray cashmere sweater and tailored trousers. There was no ostentation about him. Yet he commanded the space with an unnerving stillness. Mr. Thorne Abernathy said, his tone deferential in a way Amelia had never heard before. "This is Amelia Hayes, our foremost specialist in Renaissance-era documents and artifacts." The man turned. Amelia felt her breath catch. It wasn't that he was movie star handsome, though his features were striking, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and dark, penetrating eyes that seemed to see right through her. It was the intensity of his gaze. It was as if he was analyzing her, cataloging her in the same way she had just been studying the watermarks on the letters. "Mr. Thorne has a particular interest in the Vesalius portfolio," Abernathy explained, gesturing toward a leather-bound collection of anatomical drawings under glass. Amelia's professional instincts took over a welcome shield against the man's unnerving presence. Ah, yes. The De Humani Corporis Fabrica, a magnificent second edition print. The detail in the woodcuts is extraordinary, far superior to the first edition in my opinion. Vesalius supervised the printing himself in Basel. She moved closer to the case, pointing out a subtle detail in the engraving of a human skeleton. "You see here the shading on the clavicle. It suggests a different block cutter was used for this section one with a much finer hand. Most people miss that." She spoke with the quiet passion that always emerged when she was in her element. For a moment she forgot the imposing client and the fawning Mr. Abernathy. She was simply a historian sharing a secret with someone. The man Adrian Thorne said nothing. He simply listened, his dark eyes fixed on the detail she indicated. The silence stretched, becoming awkward. Amelia felt a familiar flush of self-doubt creep up her neck. Had she said too much? Sounded too pedantic? Richard's voice whispered in her ear. No one cares about your boring trivia, Amelia. She cleared her throat, stepping back. I apologize for rambling. Don't, he said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone that seemed to vibrate in the still air. You're the first person who hasn't tried to sell me on its monetary value. Tell me more about the block cutter. Startled, Amelia launched into a detailed explanation of the printing guilds of the 1550s, the rivalry between Swiss and Venetian artisans, and the subtle clues left behind in their work. She spoke for nearly 20 minutes. Adrian Thorne never took his eyes off her, his expression unreadable. He asked sharp, intelligent questions that went far beyond mere curiosity. He wasn't just hearing her words. He was processing them, challenging them, engaging with them. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. No one, not even her professors in university, had ever listened to her with such focused intent. When she finally paused a little breathless, he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. You know its history, not just its price. He then turned to Mr. Abernathy, his tone shifting from intellectual curiosity to clipped command. I'll take the portfolio, and I want to hire Ms. Hayes for a private project. Amelia blinked, stunned into silence. Mr. Abernathy looked equally shocked, though he recovered quickly. Of course, Mr. Thorne. I'm sure we can arrange for Ms. Hayes's services. No, Adrian interrupted, his gaze flicking back to Amelia. Not through the Chandler collection. I want to hire her directly. I have a private library at my estate. It has been neglected. It requires a curator. Someone who understands that a book's worth is not printed on its title page. He pulled a sleek black business card from his pocket. My assistant will contact you to discuss the terms. I expect to hear from you by tomorrow. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the gallery, leaving a profound silence in his wake. Amelia stared at the card in her hand. It was made of heavy matte stock, bearing only a name, Adrian Thorne, and a single phone number. No title, no company. It didn't need one. She might live a cloistered life, but even she knew that name. Adrian Thorne was a legend, a specter in the world of finance and technology. A reclusive billionaire who had built an empire from scratch and was notoriously private, almost pathologically so. He rarely appeared in public and was almost never photographed. And he wanted to hire her. Mr. Abernathy was fussing beside her, a mixture of awe and agitation on his face. My dear girl, do you have any idea who that was? He's the Thorne of Thorne Industries. He could buy this entire city block with his pocket change. But Amelia wasn't thinking about his wealth. She was thinking about the way he had listened to her. The way his eyes had held a flicker of genuine interest, not in her appearance, not in her connections, but in her knowledge. For the first time in a very long time, someone had looked at her and seen not a worthless accessory or a mousy hobbyist, but an expert, a specialist, someone of value. The ghost of Richard's voice tried to whisper its poison. It's a fluke. He's just eccentric. You'll disappoint him. But for the first time, another voice, small and unfamiliar, pushed back. It was the voice of the woman she used to be, the woman who loved history and stories, the woman who had gotten lost somewhere along the way. And it whispered a single revolutionary word, maybe. The address Adrian Thorne's assistant provided was not in Boston proper, but an hour north in a secluded corner of the coastline known for its old money estates. The gates were 20 feet of imposing wrought iron, and the driveway was a mile-long ribbon of crushed stone that wound through a forest of ancient oaks. Amelia's sputtering 12-year-old Honda felt sacrilegious on the pristine gravel. The house, when it finally appeared, was not a house. It was a sprawling, Gilded-Age mansion of granite and limestone that loomed against the moody Atlantic sky, beautiful and forbidding. She was met at the door by a severe-looking woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair, who introduced herself as Mrs. Davenport, the household manager. She led Amelia through a series of rooms that were more museum than home, cavernous halls, with marble floors, furniture that belonged behind velvet ropes, and walls hung with art that made Amelia's art historian heart ache. It was breathtakingly beautiful, but also sterile and silent. The only sounds were their footsteps echoing on the polished stone. The library was at the heart of the mansion, or rather it was the heart. 2 stories high, encircled by a mezzanine of carved mahogany, it was filled with tens of thousands of books. Sunlight streamed through a massive Palladian window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. But Adrian had been right. It was neglected. Books were piled haphazardly. Leather spines were cracking from lack of care, and a faint scent of mildew hung in the air. It was a treasure trove in desperate need of a guardian. Adrian was there, standing by the window, silhouetted against the light. "Mrs. Davenport tells me you were on time," he said without turning. "Punctuality is a virtue I appreciate. It's a magnificent collection." Amelia breathed, her eyes scanning the shelves. "Is that a first edition Principia Mathematica?" He finally turned, a faint smile touching his lips. "You have a good eye." "It is, and it is slowly rotting away along with everything else in this room. My father was a collector. I am merely a custodian, a poor one at that." He laid out the terms of his offer. It was staggering. The salary he named was more than she made in 5 years. He offered her a suite of rooms in a private wing of the mansion, full access to the collection, and an unlimited budget for restoration and acquisition. The job was simple: bring the library back to life. Catalog it, preserve it, and curate it. "Why me?" Amelia asked the question, escaping before she could stop it. "You could hire the top academics in the world for a project like this." "I could," he agreed, his gaze steady. "But they would see a collection of assets. They would create a database." "You," he said, taking a step closer, "see a story. You see the hands that held the books, the minds that wrote them. I am not hiring an academic, Ms. Hayes. I am hiring a caretaker of souls. This room is the only part of my father I ever truly respected. I want it honored." The intensity in his voice, the flicker of something vulnerable in his eyes, sealed the deal. She accepted. Moving into the Thorne estate was like stepping into another dimension. Her life of thrift and struggle evaporated overnight. Her suite was larger than her entire Boston apartment, with a bedroom overlooking the ocean and a bathroom clad in Italian marble. Meals prepared by a private chef appeared as if by magic. She had everything she could possibly want, and yet it felt like a gilded cage. The staff were polite but distant. The silence of the mansion was even more profound than the silence of her apartment. And Adrian was a ghost. He would disappear for days at a time, managing his global empire from a high-tech office in another wing of the house. Her only real companion was the library. She lost herself in its dusty aisles, her hands reverently tracing the spines of books that had witnessed centuries of history. She created a meticulous cataloging system, her days filled with the comforting routine of research, cleaning, and restoration. For the first time since before she'd met Richard, Amelia felt a sense of purpose. She was no longer just fixing broken things. She was a custodian of legacies. Her isolation was broken one afternoon by the sharp click of heels on the marble floor outside the library. A woman appeared in the doorway, exuding an aura of entitled elegance. She was tall and impossibly chic in a Chanel suit, her features a colder, sharper version of Adrian's. "So, you're the little book mouse my brother has squirreled away?" the woman said, her voice dripping with condescension. She looked Amelia up and down, her gaze lingering on Amelia's simple cotton dress and sensible shoes. The look was dismissive, appraising, and painfully familiar. It was the same look Richard's society friends used to give her. "I'm Amelia Hayes, the curator," Amelia said, keeping her voice even. "I know who you are. I'm Genevieve Thorne," she announced, as if presenting a royal title. "And I make it my business to know about the stray animals Adrian brings home." She glided into the room, running a manicured finger over a stack of books, leaving a faint smudge on the dust jacket. "Tell me, Ms. Hayes, what is it that you really do here?" "My brother has a habit of collecting strays, you see. He finds them fascinating. For a time, Then he gets bored and they have to be removed. The threat was veiled but unmistakable. In Genevieve's eyes, Amelia was an intruder, a gold digger who had somehow breached the fortress walls. The old insecurities swirled in Amelia's stomach. She was out of her depth, a commoner trespassing in a palace. Just then, Adrian's voice came from the mezzanine above. "That's enough, Genevieve." He descended the spiral staircase, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere in the room. He placed himself slightly in front of Amelia, a subtle but clear protective gesture. "Don't be so dramatic, darling," Genevieve said with a brittle laugh. "I was just getting to know our new staff member." "Amelia is not staff," Adrian said, his voice quiet but laced with steel. "She is my guest and a respected colleague. She is doing for this library what no one else could. Something you, with all your charity boards and luncheon committees, would never understand: actual meaningful work." Genevieve's face tightened, the mask of bored amusement slipping to reveal a flash of raw fury. The insult had found its mark. She shot Amelia a look of pure venom before turning on her heel and storming out of the library. Adrian turned to Amelia, his expression softening. "I apologize for my sister. She can be territorial." "It's fine," Amelia murmured, though her heart was still pounding. "It's not," he countered. "This is your space, your work. You are not to be disturbed or disrespected here. By anyone." He stood there for a moment, the space between them charged with an unspoken energy. He was her employer, her patron, but in that moment, as he defended her against his own sister, he felt like something more. An ally, a protector. It was a dizzying, terrifying, and profoundly hopeful feeling. But as she watched him walk away, Amelia couldn't shake Genevieve's parting glare. She had made a powerful enemy. The gilded cage had suddenly revealed its bars, and she realized that the ghosts of this house were far more dangerous than the ones in her own memory. Life in the Thorne mansion settled into a strange rhythm. Days were spent in the blissful solitude of the library, where Amelia unearthed one treasure after another: a forgotten manuscript by a female Renaissance poet, a series of letters from a Civil War soldier, a first-edition copy of Moby Dick with a cryptic inscription by Melville himself. Each discovery was a victory, a small piece of her own validation. Her work gave her a confidence that began to radiate outward, softening the tired lines around her eyes and putting a spark of intellectual fire back into her gaze. Evenings, however, were a different matter. More and more often, Adrian would seek her out. He wouldn't summon her. He would simply appear at the library door as the sun began to set, holding 2 glasses and a bottle of ridiculously expensive wine. He'd ask about her day, about the stories she had uncovered on the shelves, and then he would start to share his own. He spoke of his lonely childhood in the cavernous mansion of a father who collected priceless objects but showed no affection for his own son, and of a mother who had faded into a quiet depression long before she passed away. He spoke of the immense pressure of his name, the crushing weight of an empire he never asked for, but felt duty-bound to command. In the warm glow of the library lamp, surrounded by the ghosts of history, they found a strange kinship. Amelia saw past the billionaire and glimpsed the lonely man beneath. He, in turn, seemed to see past her brokenness to the resilient, passionate woman she was fighting to become. The space between them, once charged with professional courtesy, now hummed with a different, more personal energy. But shadows have a way of creeping into even the most brightly lit rooms. Genevieve Thorne was a master of the shadows. She couldn't attack Amelia directly, not after Adrian's warning, so she began a campaign of insidious psychological warfare. Staff members would suddenly become cold and unhelpful. A priceless book Amelia was restoring would be moved from its climate-controlled case, only to be found by Genevieve in a damp corner of the room. Rumors began to trickle back to Amelia via a sympathetic young housekeeper named Clara. Whispers among the staff planted by Genevieve painted Amelia as a cunning manipulator, a seductress worming her way into the reclusive billionaire's confidence. The whispers reached beyond the estate walls. Amelia discovered to her horror that gossip columns in New York and London had begun to mention Adrian Thorne's mysterious new companion. They printed grainy, long-lens photos of her walking on the estate grounds, describing her as a dowdy divorcee with a checkered past. Amelia knew with a sickening certainty who was feeding them this information. The campaign of whispers was unnerving, but the most painful blow came from the past. One Saturday afternoon, a gleaming silver Bentley crunched up the driveway. Out stepped Richard Sterling. He looked slicker and more polished than ever, his suit ostentatiously expensive, his smile predatory. He had found her. Amelia met him in the grand foyer, her body rigid with a mixture of fear and rage. "What are you doing here, Richard?" "Well, hello to you too, Amelia," he said, his eyes raking over her, taking in her simple but well-made clothes and the unfamiliar confidence in her posture. His gaze swept around the opulent hall, a greedy, envious light in his eyes. "My God. You certainly landed on your feet. I have to admit I'm impressed. I never took you for the ambitious type." "Get out," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Not so fast," he purred, stepping closer. "I heard through the grapevine Cassandra's father sits on a board with one of Thorne's VPs that my little ex-wife was shacked up with the Howard Hughes of our generation. I came to see for myself. And maybe to offer a warning. As a concerned ex-husband, of course. I don't need anything from you." "Oh, I think you do," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "A man like Thorne doesn't get involved with someone like you for no reason. He's using you, Amelia. For what I don't know. Maybe he has a fetish for charity cases, but when he's done he'll discard you just like everyone else. But I know you. I know your secrets. I can help you navigate this. We could be a team. Imagine what we could get from him." The crudeness of it, the sheer audacity, made her feel ill. He saw her new life not as her achievement, but as an opportunity for him to exploit. He still saw her as his property, an extension of his own ambition. "You're pathetic." She spat the words tasting like venom and freedom. "You come here to this house that I am in because of my talent, something you never even acknowledged, and you try to blackmail me. You are exactly as small and as hollow as I remember. Now leave before I have you thrown out." A flicker of surprise, then rage, crossed his face. He wasn't used to her defiance. He opened his mouth to retort, but Adrian's voice cut through the cavernous space. "Is there a problem here?" Adrian stood at the top of the grand staircase, his expression unreadable, but his presence was a thundercloud. He had clearly heard everything. Richard's demeanor shifted instantly. He plastered on a sycophantic smile. "Adrian Thorne. Richard Sterling. Sterling and Vanguard. A great admirer of your work." He extended a hand that Adrian completely ignored. Adrian descended the stairs slowly, his eyes locked on Richard. "I know who you are, and I know what you are. You have 5 seconds to remove yourself from my property before I call security and have you cited for trespassing." His voice was deathly calm, which made it all the more menacing. Richard's face paled. He shot Amelia a look that was a toxic cocktail of hatred and thwarted greed, then turned and scurried out the door like the rat he was. The silence he left behind was heavy. "I'm sorry," Amelia whispered, her cheeks burning with humiliation. "I don't know how he found me." "It wasn't your fault," Adrian said, his eyes searching her face. "But he will be back. Men like that are vermin. They always circle back to what they think they own." He paused, his gaze intense. "And my sister? She is no better. She sees you as a threat to her position. They will work together. They will try to destroy you to get to me." He was stating it as a fact, not a possibility. In that moment, Amelia understood the true nature of the world she had entered. It was a world of gilded surfaces and shadowy depths, of immense power and profound paranoia. She wasn't just a curator in a library anymore. She was a piece on a very dangerous chessboard. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because I want you to be prepared," he said, "and because I don't want you to leave." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable. "This house was a tomb before you came, Amelia. You brought it back to life. You bring me back to life." He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. His touch was electric, a spark of warmth in the cold, cavernous foyer. It was a gesture of profound intimacy that said more than any words could. It was a declaration of allegiance, but it was also a declaration of war. By choosing her, he had drawn the battle lines. And Amelia knew with a chilling certainty that Richard and Genevieve would not rest until they saw her broken and cast out once more. The whispers were about to become a storm. The Thorne Foundation's annual Acquisitions Gala was the crown jewel of the Boston social calendar. It was a night where old money and new tech collided, a high-stakes performance of wealth and influence held for the first time in the grand ballroom of the Thorne estate. For weeks the mansion had been in a state of controlled chaos, as florists, caterers, and event planners swarmed the grounds. For Amelia it was the night she had been dreading. Adrian had insisted she attend not as his curator but as his partner, his guest of honor. It was to be her public debut. It was also, she knew, the stage Genevieve and Richard had chosen for their final brutal act. Amelia stood before the mirror in her suite, scarcely recognizing the woman staring back. Adrian had commissioned a dress for her from a designer in Paris. It was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that shimmered like a star-dusted sky. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, and around her neck lay a delicate diamond necklace, a gift from Adrian, who had simply left the velvet box on her pillow with a note that said, "For the woman who illuminates every room she enters." She looked elegant, poised, beautiful even. But inside her stomach was a knot of anxiety. The ghost of Richard's voice was screaming at her. "Imposter! You don't belong! They'll all see you for the worthless little fraud you are." Adrian appeared in the doorway of her sitting room, breathtakingly handsome in a classic black tuxedo. He stopped short when he saw her. The look in his eyes a mixture of awe, admiration, and something deeper. Something fiercely protective silenced the ghost in her head for a moment. "Amelia," he breathed, "you are incandescent." He offered her his arm, his touch a steadying warmth against her bare skin. "Ready for battle," he murmured, his voice for her ears only. She took a deep breath. "Ready." Walking into the ballroom on Adrian's arm was like stepping into a piranha tank. A hush fell over the crowd, followed by a tidal wave of whispers. Hundreds of pairs of eyes followed them, dissecting her, judging her. She could feel Genevieve's malevolent gaze from across the room where she stood talking to a small group, Richard Sterling smirking by her side. They looked like a pair of beautifully dressed vultures. The evening was a blur of introductions to senators, CEOs, and titans of industry. Amelia handled it with a grace she didn't know she possessed, discussing art history and the Foundation's work with an easy intelligence that surprised everyone, including herself. Adrian never left her side, his presence a silent shield. The climax of the evening was the auction of a newly acquired centerpiece for the Foundation, a recently discovered set of correspondence from Benjamin Franklin, written during his time in Paris. Adrian was set to give a speech before the bidding began. As he walked toward the stage, Genevieve made her move. She intercepted him, a champagne flute in her hand, and with a practiced, clumsy-looking stumble she accidentally spilled the entire contents down the front of his shirt. "Oh, Adrian, darling, I'm so dreadfully sorry," she cried, dabbing at his shirt with a napkin, a picture of insincere remorse. "You must go and change immediately." "Don't worry," she added, turning to the crowd with a triumphant smile. "I can handle the presentation. And I believe our dear Richard Sterling, a man of considerable financial acumen, has agreed to help me." It was a perfectly executed coup. Adrian was forced off stage, leaving the floor to his enemies. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. Genevieve took the microphone, her voice smooth as silk. "While my brother is recovering from my little mishap, we thought we'd move on to our most prized acquisition, the Franklin letters. She gestured to the letters displayed in a climate-controlled glass case on the stage. Richard stepped forward, a condescending smirk on his face. "A remarkable find," he began, his voice booming with false authority. "And a remarkable investment. But in the world of high-stakes collecting, provenance is everything. And there have been some whispers concerning the authentication of these documents." He let the accusation hang in the air. The room fell silent. "The authentication," Richard continued, his eyes finding Amelia in the crowd and pinning her with his gaze, "was overseen by the Foundation's new curator, Ms. Amelia Hayes. A woman with, shall we say, a rather obscure background. One has to wonder if a person of her limited experience could be trusted with an acquisition of this magnitude. It would be a terrible embarrassment for the Foundation if these letters were later found to be forgeries. It was a vicious public assassination. He was destroying her professional credibility, framing her as either incompetent or worse, complicit in a fraud. He was weaponizing her past, her worthlessness, against her." The crowd murmured, their faces a mixture of shock and salacious interest. Amelia felt the floor drop out from under her. She wanted to run, to disappear. But then she saw it. A tiny detail on one of the displayed letters. A watermark. It was the same watermark she had studied for weeks, the one that had proven the letter's authenticity. And it was the same watermark on a set of papers she'd seen in a different context. Papers Richard had once shown her from a shady dealer he knew, bragging about how they were perfect for creating historical reproductions. He wasn't just questioning the letters. He was the source of the potential forgery. This wasn't just an attack. It was a frame-up. Something inside her snapped. The fear, the doubt, the years of feeling small and silenced, it all burned away, replaced by a cold, clear rage. She was not the same broken woman he had divorced. She was the caretaker of souls. She was an expert. And this was her territory. She began to walk toward the stage, her steps purposeful and steady. The crowd parted before her. She took a second microphone from a stunned-looking assistant. "You're right about one thing, Richard," she said, her voice clear and strong, ringing through the silent ballroom. "Provenance is everything." She turned to the audience. "These letters are without a doubt authentic. I spent over 100 hours verifying them myself. The paper is 18th century linen rag consistent with Franklin's known suppliers. The iron gall ink has oxidized in a way that can only be achieved over 2 centuries. But the most definitive proof," she said, her eyes locking with Richard's, "is the watermark. A small, unique fleur-de-lis, the mark of a specific paper maker in Passy, France, whose workshop we know Franklin frequented." She paused, letting the information sink in. "It's a very rare watermark. In fact, I've only seen it once before. On a batch of blank 18th century paper that a particularly unscrupulous antiques dealer was trying to sell a few years ago. He was peddling it to forgers. A man I used to know was very interested in that paper. He thought it was a brilliant investment." Richard's face went white. He knew she was talking about him. "What a coincidence." Amelia continued, her voice dripping with ice. "That whispers about these letters being forgeries should come from the one man who once contemplated commissioning such forgeries himself. It almost seems as if he might be trying to devalue the authentic article so that he or an associate could purchase it at a bargain price. Or perhaps he's simply trying to discredit the person who could most easily expose him." The unmasking was complete. She hadn't just defended herself. She had exposed his character, his corruption, his pathetic, grasping greed in front of the most powerful people in the city. Genevieve stood frozen, her plan having backfired in the most spectacular way. Just then Adrian reappeared on the stage. His shirt was still damp, but his eyes were blazing with pride. He walked straight to Amelia, took the microphone, and addressed the stunned crowd. "It seems we owe Ms. Hayes a debt of gratitude," he said, his voice resonating with power. "Not only for her impeccable work in authenticating these letters, but for her courage in defending their integrity and the integrity of this foundation from baseless and malicious attacks." He looked from Richard's ashen face to his sister's furious one. The Thorn Foundation has no tolerance for fraud, nor for those who would attempt to manipulate our work for their own petty games." He then turned to Amelia. He didn't touch her, but his next words were more intimate than any embrace. "The centerpiece of tonight's auction is not the Franklin letters. It is the brilliant woman who saved them." He began to applaud. Slowly at first, then thunderously the entire room joined in. They were not applauding a billionaire's new girlfriend. They were applauding a hero, a quiet, forgotten woman who had found her voice and used it to slay her dragons in a room full of giants. In the glare of 100 spotlights, Amelia Hayes stood tall, no longer an echo, but a roar. The fallout from the gala was swift and brutal. Richard Sterling's world imploded. The story of his public humiliation, coupled with Adrian's quiet behind-the-scenes influence, was a death knell for his career. Phones at Sterling and Vanguard rang with calls from furious clients pulling their investments. Cassandra Vanderbilt's father, a man who valued reputation above all else, broke the engagement within 24 hours. Richard was ruined, exposed as the hollow, grasping man he had always been. He vanished from the society pages, becoming a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Genevieve Thorne's punishment was more personal and in many ways more severe. Adrian confronted her in the cold light of the morning after. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. He simply informed her that she was being removed from the board of the Thorn Foundation effective immediately. Her access to the family's private trust was being suspended pending a full review. He wasn't disowning her, but he was stripping her of the two things she valued most: power and money. He was forcing her to confront a life without the Thorn name as her shield and her sword. For Genevieve, it was a fate worse than exile. Amelia watched the wreckage from the calm sanctuary of the library. She felt no triumph, no vindictive pleasure. Just a quiet, profound sense of release, as if a heavy cloak she had been wearing for years had finally been lifted from her shoulders. A week after the gala, Adrian found her perched on a ladder, carefully dusting a row of 17th-century philosophy texts. He didn't say anything, just watched her for a moment, an unreadable expression on his face. "I've been thinking," he said finally, his voice making her look down, "about this library. It's more than a collection. It's a living history. It needs more than a curator. It needs a director, someone with vision." He pulled a thick sheaf of documents from a leather portfolio. "These are the incorporation papers for a new independent trust. I'm endowing it with $100 million to start. Its mission will be to preserve historical texts and artifacts and to fund literacy programs in underserved communities. It will be called the Hayes Thorn Legacy Foundation." Amelia stared at him, her heart seeming to stop. Hayes Thorn. "I can think of no one better to run it," he said, his voice soft but certain. "I want you to be its president. You'll have full autonomy, a board of directors you choose, a mission you define." This was his grand gesture, not a diamond ring or a flashy car, not a marriage proposal whispered in the dark. It was something far more meaningful. He wasn't just offering her his world, he was giving her a world of her own to build. He was seeing her not as an appendage to his life, but as a force in her own right. He was recognizing her talent, her passion, her worth, and giving it a name and a legacy. This was her crown. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the sight of the man standing before her. They weren't tears of sadness or relief, but of a joy so profound it was painful. "Adrian, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he whispered, moving to the base of the ladder and looking up at her. The vast, intimidating space of the library seemed to shrink, creating a world that contained only the two of them. "Say you'll build this with me." She descended the ladder and stood before him, the incorporation papers clutched in her hand. For a decade, another man had defined her worth by what she lacked. Now this man was defining it by the immense scope of her potential. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I will." He didn't kiss her then. Instead, he reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. It was a gesture of partnership, of equality. "I've spent my life surrounded by people who wanted something from me," he said. His dark eyes filled with a raw honesty that humbled her. "My name, my money, my power. You are the only person who ever simply wanted to talk to me about a book." In that moment, Amelia understood. He had been just as trapped in his gilded cage as she had been in her prison of worthlessness. They were two lonely souls who had found each other in a dusty, forgotten library. He hadn't rescued her, and she hadn't saved him. They had together created a space where they could both be free. Later that night, he led her out onto a stone balcony overlooking the restless Atlantic. The moon cast a silver path across the inky water. He finally drew her into his arms, and when he kissed her, it wasn't a kiss of passionate, desperate romance. It was a kiss of deep, quiet understanding. It was a kiss that tasted of homecoming. She was no longer Amelia Hayes, the worthless ex-wife. She was Amelia Hayes, president of the Hayes Thorne Legacy Foundation. A woman of substance, of purpose. A woman crowned not by a tiara, but by respect. A woman who had been through the fire, and emerged not scorched but forged in gold like the kintsugi pottery she so loved. She had taken the broken pieces of her life and made them into something stronger, more beautiful than they had ever been before. And beside her stood a man who didn't see the scars. He only saw the light that shone through the cracks. 2 years passed. The Hayes Thorne Legacy Foundation became a quiet powerhouse in the worlds of philanthropy and historical preservation. Under Amelia's guidance, it did not merely acquire artifacts, it breathed life back into them. It funded the digitization of fragile manuscripts, making them accessible to scholars worldwide. It saved crumbling historical libraries in small towns, and it launched a mobile literacy program, a library on wheels that brought books to children in remote, impoverished areas. Amelia, once a reclusive restorer, was now a respected leader, known for her sharp intellect, her fierce passion, and her deep empathy. She gave speeches at conferences and met with academics, her voice no longer a hesitant whisper, but a confident, resonant instrument of change. The Thorne Mansion was transformed. The silence was no longer sterile and intimidating. It was peaceful. Laughter now echoed in the grand halls, the laughter of the children from the Foundation's programs who came for special tours, their eyes wide with wonder at the library. The house was no longer a monument to a lonely past, but a beacon for a hopeful future. Amelia and Adrian built a life that was both extraordinary and wonderfully ordinary. They were a power couple, their names appearing in articles about global philanthropy, but they guarded their private time fiercely. Their evenings were not spent at society galas, but in the library, a fire crackling in the hearth, debating a line of poetry or planning their next project. He taught her how to sail his yacht, and she taught him the delicate art of bookbinding. He found peace in the quiet, meticulous work, and she found freedom in the vast, open ocean. They were partners in every sense of the word. He trusted her vision for the Foundation implicitly, and she became his most valued confidant, a sounding board for the complex decisions his empire demanded. She didn't just share his life. She enriched it, challenged it, and gave it a purpose beyond the accumulation of wealth. One crisp autumn afternoon, Amelia stood on the balcony overlooking the sea, a cup of tea warming her hands. She wore a simple cashmere sweater and jeans, her hair loose in the wind. She was watching the Foundation's bookmobile make its way back up the long driveway after a day spent at a local community center. Adrian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Look at what you've built," he said softly, his voice filled with pride. She leaned back against him, a contented smile on her face. "What we've built." A piece of mail had arrived that morning, forwarded from her old Boston address. It was a crumpled, wine-stained announcement from a cut-rate wedding chapel in Las Vegas. A small blurry photo showed Richard Sterling looking bloated and tired beside a woman with brassy hair and a desperate smile. He had married his secretary. It was a pathetic postscript to a chapter of her life that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. She had glanced at it, felt not a flicker of anger or pain, only a distant detached pity, and had dropped it into the recycling bin without a second thought. The ghost of his voice was gone. The word worthless had lost its power. It was just a meaningless sound, a relic from a buried past. Her worth was not something that could be given or taken away by a man. It was something she had forged herself in the quiet hours spent with broken things, in the courage it took to speak her truth in a room full of enemies, and in the love she now shared with a man who saw her truly and completely. "What are you thinking about?" Adrian murmured into her hair. She turned in his arms, her hands coming up to cup his face. She looked into his dark, intense eyes, the eyes that had seen her value when she couldn't see it herself. "I was just thinking," she said, her voice full of a quiet, unshakable certainty that a broken thing can become more beautiful than it ever was before. You just need the right person to see its story. He smiled a genuine, soul-deep smile that was reserved only for her, and lowered his head to kiss her. And in that kiss by the sea, in the life they had built together, was the quiet, triumphant, and everlasting truth of her own precious legacy. Her story wasn't a fairy tale about a poor girl being rescued by a prince. It was the story of a queen who had forgotten she had a crown, and the quiet king who simply reminded her where to find it, not on her head, but in her own capable hands. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but a story can change a life. Amelia's journey from being called worthless by the man who should have cherished her to being crowned a queen by a billionaire who saw her true value is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. It's a reminder that our worth is not defined by those who try to tear us down, but by the strength we find within ourselves to rise above the ashes. If her story of resilience, courage, and finding love against all odds touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up to let us know. Don't forget to share it with someone who might need to hear this message, and subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories that prove that sometimes the best revenge is building a life more beautiful than the one that was taken from you. Click that subscribe button and join our community.
The ballroom at the Metropolitan Museum of Art glittered, but not as brightly as the diamonds on the women or the contempt in Grayson Vanderbilt's eyes. He stared at the necklace his wife Annalise had worn. It wasn't Cartier, it wasn't Van Cleef, it was hers, handmade. A curious, sunset-colored stone cradled in twisted silver. He laughed a sound that cut through the polite chatter. "My dear," he said loud enough for the trustees of the Whitney to hear, "did you win that in a claw machine? Please take it off. You're embarrassing the family name." This single moment of public humiliation was not the end of Annalise's story. It was the catalyst that would ignite a fire, transforming her from a society wife into the titan of a billion-dollar empire built on the very stone he mocked. The air in the Vanderbilt penthouse on Park Avenue was always thin-scrubbed of emotion and thick with the scent of old money and white orchids. For Annalise Rosenthal, it had been a beautiful prison for 7 years. Her marriage to Grayson Vanderbilt IV wasn't a love story. It was a merger. Her family had a respectable name in academia, but no real fortune. Grayson's family, the Vanderbilts of shipping and banking fame, had a fortune so vast it was practically a character. In their lives, a demanding patriarch dictating their every move. Annalise's role was simple: be beautiful, be silent, and produce an heir. She had succeeded at the first, perfected the second, and failed so far at the third. Her quiet rebellion came in the form of a small workshop tucked away in a spare room overlooking the less fashionable side of the building. There, with a simple torch, pliers, and sheets of silver, she made jewelry. It wasn't a hobby, it was a language. Each piece was a story, a feeling she couldn't otherwise express. She'd spend hours sketching designs inspired by architectural details she'd see on her lonely walks, or the unique mineral inclusions she'd find in stones bought from obscure dealers online. It was the only part of her life that was truly hers. The piece that would end her marriage was born from a place of deep sentimentality. It was a necklace centered around a peculiar stone she had bought for $75 from an old man's stall at the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show. He'd called it a fluke sapphire, too strange in color to be valuable. It was a mesmerizing stone, the color of a tropical sunset, shifting from a fiery orange pink to a soft lavender, depending on the light. It reminded her of the one happy memory she had with Grayson, a fleeting sunset they had watched in Bali on their honeymoon before the weight of his name had fully descended upon them. She framed it in a nest of hand-wrought, oxidized silver, designed to look like a thorny protective branch. It was her heart translated into metal and mineral. She decided to wear it to the annual preservation gala at the Met. It was a bold move. The Vanderbilt women were expected to be draped in the family's vault collection, heavy historical pieces from Graff and Harry Winston that felt more like shackles than adornments. When she came down the grand staircase, Grayson's face, usually a mask of handsome indifference, tightened. "What is that?" he asked, his voice low and serrated. "I made it," Annalise said, a flicker of pride in her voice. "The stone reminded me of Bali." His eyes went flat. "It's sentimental junk. We're going to be photographed with the Rockefellers and the Lauders tonight. You will not wear that thing. Go upstairs and put on the Bulgari sapphires." "No," she said, the word feeling foreign and powerful on her tongue. "I want to wear this." Grayson's jaw clenched. He saw her refusal, not as a matter of taste, but as an act of defiance, a crack in the perfect facade of his life. He said nothing more, but the fury radiated from him, a cold aura that followed them into the chauffeured Bentley and through the flashbulbs on the museum steps. The humiliation, when it came, was masterful in its cruelty. They were standing in a circle with a U.S. senator and a famous contemporary artist, Catherine Sachs. Catherine, known for her sharp eye, leaned in slightly. "Annalise, what a fascinating piece. The stone is extraordinary. What is it?" Before Annalise could answer, Grayson let out his booming laugh. It was a performance designed for maximum impact. A fascinating piece of what Catherine Annalise has a charming little hobby. She makes trinkets. He turned to Annalise, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. "My dear, did you win that in a claw machine? It's sweet, but it's hardly appropriate for the Met." He then looked at the others, his smile wide and apologetic. "You'll have to forgive her. She has a creative soul. Please," he said, his voice dropping but still audible to everyone in their circle. "Take it off. You're embarrassing the family name. Put it in your purse." The air froze. The senator gave a tight, uncomfortable smile. Catherine Sachs's eyes widened, a flicker of pity crossing her face before she looked away. Annalise felt the blood drain from her face. Every eye was on her, on the necklace, on her shame. It wasn't just an insult. It was a public execution of her identity. He hadn't just called her necklace cheap. He had called her cheap. Her one private act of creation, her one piece of herself had been held up and declared worthless. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. A strange, chilling calm washed over her. She looked Grayson directly in the eye, and for the first time he saw something other than placid obedience. He saw a stranger. Without a word, she unclasped the necklace, its silver cool against her hot skin, and dropped it into her small beaded clutch. The rest of the night was a blur. She smiled. She nodded. She sipped her champagne. But inside, a 7-year dam of resentment and unspoken pain had shattered. She wasn't a Vanderbilt anymore. She was just Annalise Rosenthal, a woman holding a cheap stone in a ridiculously expensive purse. When they got home, the silence in the penthouse was screaming. "You will never pull a stunt like that again," Grayson began, untying his bow tie. "You're right," Annalise said, her voice even. "I won't. I want a divorce." Grayson stopped. He turned to look at her, a flicker of surprise followed by pure derision. "A divorce? On what grounds that I saved you from looking like you shopped for your jewelry at a street fair?" on the grounds that I'd rather live in a studio apartment in Queens and be myself than live in this mausoleum and be your accessory. His laughter this time was genuine and far crueler than it had been at the party. Don't be ridiculous. You have nothing. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad. You signed it. You walk away with the clothes on your back and a one-time settlement that wouldn't cover your Neiman Marcus bill for a single season. You'll come crawling back within a month. We'll see, she said, walking past him and towards the guest wing, where she locked the door. The Vanderbilt divorce was swift and brutal. Grayson's lawyers, a pack of sharks from Sullivan and Cromwell, painted her as an unstable, ungrateful woman. The prenup was indeed ironclad. As he had predicted, she was left with a fraction of what people assumed. The tabloids had a field day branding her the jilted jeweler. She moved out of the Park Avenue Palace and into a small, pre-war one-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side that her settlement barely covered for a year. The silence was no longer screaming, it was just empty. She was alone, 32 years old, with a bruised reputation and a future that was a terrifying blank slate. In her small jewelry box, amidst the few designer pieces she was allowed to keep, sat the thorny silver necklace, its sunset stone seeming to mock her. It was the reason for her ruin, or so she thought. The first few months of Annalise's new life were a study in grey. The vibrant colours of the society pages were replaced by the monochrome reality of budgeting and grocery shopping. The catered lunches were gone, replaced by toast and coffee. The stream of invitations dried up to a trickle, then stopped completely. She was a ghost in the city that had once been her stage. Her days were long and empty, the silence of her small apartment a constant reminder of how far she had fallen. She sold off the designer bags and shoes. Grayson had let her keep the cash, a temporary buffer against the encroaching panic. Her gaze kept returning to the necklace. It sat on her dresser, a beautiful, painful artifact of her public execution. She hated it. She hated what it represented, her naivety, her husband's cruelty, her fall from grace. One rainy Tuesday, with her bank account dipping to a new, terrifying low, she made a decision. She would sell it. Even if it was just for the silver, a few $100s was better than nothing. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She didn't go to the flashy jewelers in the Diamond District on 47th Street. The thought of their condescending eyes was too much to bear. Instead, she remembered a small, dusty shop she'd once passed on a side street in Greenwich Village. It had a faded, hand-painted sign that read, Chadwick & Sons, Gemology and Antiquities. There was no Sons in sight, only a stooped elderly man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, who looked as ancient as the artifacts in his window. She pushed open the door, a small bell tinkling overhead. The shop smelled of old paper, metal polish, and dust. The man at the counter looked up from a loupe through which he was examining a Victorian-era cameo. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a gravelly but kind baritone. I'd like to sell this," Annalise said, her voice barely a whisper. She laid the necklace on the worn velvet counter. Her hands trembled slightly. The man, Arthur Chadwick, picked it up. His touch was surprisingly gentle. He didn't look at the silverwork first, as she expected. His eyes were immediately drawn to the stone. He turned it over and over, holding it up to the weak light filtering through the window, then under the bright, focused beam of his desk lamp. He was silent for a long time, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The silver is lovely," he finally said, his gaze still fixed on the stone. "Delicate work, very organic. But this stone, where did you get this?" "A gem show in Tucson, a while ago." The seller said it was a fluke sapphire, Annalise explained, feeling the familiar sting of embarrassment. "I know it's not worth much, but I was hoping the silver—" "Not worth much," Arthur interrupted, looking at her over the top of his glasses for the first time. There was a strange intensity in his eyes. "My dear girl, the man who sold you this was either a fool or a thief who didn't know what he was stealing." He placed the stone under a microscope, fiddling with the focus knobs. He muttered to himself words like pleochroism, rutile silk, and uncharacteristic crystalline structure. Annalise stood awkwardly, assuming he was just being dramatic. After another 5 minutes, he pushed himself back from the microscope and took a deep, shaky breath. He looked at Annalise, his eyes wide. This is not a fluke sapphire. This is a Padparadscha sapphire. A what? Padparadscha. It's Sinhalese for lotus blossom. They are the rarest and most valuable of all sapphires. They have a very specific, delicate balance of pink and orange. A true Padparadscha is worth more per carat than a fine diamond. But this, he trailed off, picking up the stone again. This is something else entirely. I've never seen one that shifts color so dramatically. It's almost as if it has the color change properties of an alexandrite, but in the Padparadscha spectrum. It moves from lotus pink to a deep, fiery sunset orange. It's a chameleon. Annalise stared at him, uncomprehending. So, it's valuable? Arthur let out a short, incredulous laugh. Valuable young lady, the Hope Diamond is valuable. A Monet is valuable. This is singular. It's a geological anomaly. It's a new classification of gemstone. A 12-carat Padparadscha of fine quality might fetch $500,000 at auction. A stone like this, with this unique documented color change phenomenon, I can't even begin to put a price on it. It's a specimen stone of museum quality. To a collector, to a house like Cartier, or a scientific institution like the GIA, this stone is priceless. Annalise felt her knees go weak. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. Priceless. The man sold it to me for $75. Then today is your lucky day, Arthur said, his expression turning serious. But it's also a dangerous day. A stone like this doesn't just get sold over the counter. It needs to be certified, documented, and handled with extreme care. There are people who would kill for a stone like this. The irony was so thick, she could have choked on it. The cheap stone. The trinket she won in a claw machine. The source of her greatest humiliation was in fact a treasure of unimaginable worth. Grayson's mockery echoed in her head, but now it sounded different, not like the pronouncement of a king, but the braying of an ignorant fool. He, with all his inherited knowledge of luxury, with his family's vaults of important jewels, had stared at a miracle of nature and seen nothing but junk. He had judged its value based on its setting, not in a famous designer's platinum, but in her own humble silver. What do I do? Annalise asked, her mind reeling. Arthur saw the panic and confusion in her eyes. He saw the faint bruises of exhaustion under them. The expensive but slightly worn coat, the story of a woman adrift. First, he said, his voice softening, we get this properly documented. I have contacts at the Gemological Institute of America. We need to get a full report, a monograph. This will be its birth certificate, and it will be in your name. Annalise Rosenthal. Secondly, you need to decide what to do with it. You could sell it. A private sale to the right collector could set you up for life, for many, many lives. He paused, looking from the stone to her face. Or you could do something else. What else? A stone like this isn't just a commodity. Arthur said, his eyes gleaming with a passion she recognized. It was the same passion she felt in her workshop. It's a muse. It's the cornerstone of a legend. A woman who discovers a stone like this, who has the eye to see its beauty when no one else did. A woman who can craft a setting for it with her own hands. That woman doesn't just sell the stone, she builds a kingdom around it. In that dusty, forgotten shop, surrounded by the ghosts of other people's treasures, Annalise felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years' hope. But it was more than that. It was a fierce, burning sense of purpose. Arthur Chadwick hadn't just appraised her stone, he had appraised her, and for the first time since her world had crumbled, someone had seen her true worth. Selling the stone would be an ending. It would be money security, a comfortable, quiet life. It would be a final silent victory over Grayson. But building something, that would be a beginning. It would be a roar. "Tell me more about building a kingdom," she said, her voice no longer a whisper. The decision was made. Annalise would not sell the stone. The Rosenthal chameleon, as the GIA officially named it in their stunning monograph, would not be a quick payday. It would be her seed capital, her silent partner, her statement of intent. The GIA certification process was arduous and exhilarating. Arthur Chadwick guided her through it, his connections opening doors that would have been welded shut to a woman with no industry credentials. The final report was more than a document. It was a validation. It described the stone's unique triclinic crystal system and the trace elements of manganese and chromium that caused its unprecedented color shift, officially valuing it for insurance purposes at a staggering 18 million. The number was so absurd, it felt like fiction. Annalise, however, did not sell. Instead, she leveraged. She, with the GA certificate and Arthur as her venerated advisor, she secured a heavily collateralized loan against a fraction of the stone's value. It wasn't the full $18 million. No bank was that audacious, but it was enough. She walked out of a private bank, not with a check, but with a credit line of $4 million. It was the most terrifying and liberating moment of her life. Her first move was not to rent a lavish office or hire a firm. It was to fly to Antwerp, the world's diamond capital, with Arthur. But she wasn't there for diamonds. She was there to meet the cutters, the brokers, the families who dealt in the rarest colored gemstones. Guided by Arthur, she didn't go to the big sterile exchanges. She went to the small multi-generational workshops in the back alleys, where masters who could trace their lineage back centuries still cut stones by hand and eye. She didn't buy what was fashionable. She bought what spoke to her. She bought a suite of unheated lavender spinels from Burma that glowed from within. She bought a seafoam green tourmaline from Mozambique that was so heavily included with fibrous crystals it looked like a frozen storm. She acquired a parcel of raw, uncut emeralds from a small Colombian mine, not for their clarity, but for the dramatic dark carbon gardens trapped within them. The established houses would have rejected these stones as flawed. Annalise saw them as having character. She believed perfection was sterile. The flaws were the stone's signature, its story. This became the core philosophy of her brand. She named her company simply Annalise. All caps, no frills, a declaration. Her next target was an investor. The bank loan was for materials and setup, but to build a global brand, she needed strategic capital and expertise. She set her sights on one person, Isabel Moreau, the notoriously shrewd head of Moreau Capital, a venture fund specializing in disruptive luxury. Isabel was known as the Ice Queen of Parisian finance, a woman who had built her fortune by betting on underdog brands and then molding them into powerhouses. She rarely took meetings without a seven-figure introduction. Annalise got the meeting through sheer audacity. She sent a courier directly to Isabel's office on the Place Vendôme. The package contained no business plan, no pitch deck. It contained a single perfect lavender spinel set in a simple temporary silver ring she had made herself, and a handwritten note, "Perfection is boring. Let's have a conversation about the beauty of the imperfect. Annalise Rosenthal." 2 days later, she was summoned to Paris. Isabel Moreau's office was a minimalist masterpiece of glass and grey marble overlooking the glittering jewelry houses she so often competed with. Isabel herself was in her late 40s, with razor-sharp black hair and eyes that seemed to conduct a full financial audit in a single glance. "You have 10 minutes, Isabel said, not bothering with pleasantries. The spinel sat on her desk. "Your stone is intriguing. Your method of introduction is either arrogant or brilliant. Convince me." Annalise didn't talk about profit margins or market share. She told her story. She spoke of her workshop in the Vanderbilt penthouse, a secret garden of creativity. She talked about the soul of stones, how the inclusions in an emerald were a fingerprint of the earth itself, how the subtle color variations in a sapphire told a story of its violent volcanic birth. She laid out her vision, a luxury jewelry house that celebrated not flawless cold perfection, but character narrative and the raw, untamed beauty of nature. Each piece would be one of a kind, built around a unique stone, its design an extension of that stone's intrinsic story. The world doesn't need another Tiffany's, Annalise said, her voice steady. We don't need another showcase of massive flawless diamonds that say nothing but, "I'm rich." People, a new generation of discerning women, are craving authenticity. They want a piece of jewelry that is as unique as they are, a piece that has a soul. We will not sell jewelry. We will sell talismans. We will sell stories. She finished by sliding the GIA monograph for the Rosenthal chameleon across the desk. And this is our legend, the stone my ex-husband called cheap. It will not be for sale. It will be the heart of the company, the crown jewel of our private collection, a symbol of seeing value where others see none. Isabel was silent. She picked up the spinel again, turning it in the light. She read the cover of the GIA report. She looked at Annalise, her face unreadable. The luxury market is built on heritage and perception, Isabel finally said, her tone clinical. You have no heritage. Your perception is currently that of a tabloid figure. Your ex-husband is a Vanderbilt. They could crush you with a single press release. Let them try, Annalise replied, her chin held high. They represent the old guard, the idea that value is dictated by a name brand and a price tag. We represent the new world where value is intrinsic, personal, and authentic. Their attack will only amplify our message. A slow smile spread across Isabel Moreau's face. It was the first crack in her icy facade. You are either completely insane or you are the future. I find both possibilities profitable. She stood and extended a hand. Welcome to the Place Vendôme, Ms. Rosenthal. Let's go build your empire. The next year was a whirlwind. With Isabel's backing, Annalise established her atelier not in a flashy storefront, but in a private appointment-only salon in a historic Soho loft. She hired a small team of master jewelers, artisans, who felt stifled by the rigid designs of the major houses and yearned for creative freedom. She was a demanding creative director, obsessing over every detail from the exact alloy of 22-carat gold they used warmer and richer than the standard 18K to the hand-stitched silk pouches each piece was delivered in. The first collection, Origin, was unveiled not at a splashy party, but through a quiet exclusive, showing for a handful of influential editors, stylists, and private clients. There were only 30 pieces. One was a ring featuring the storm-tossed Mozambique tourmaline, set in blackened gold, that climbed the stone like lightning. Another was a pendant with a Colombian emerald, its internal garden enhanced by a halo of tiny raw diamond crystals looking like captured dewdrops. The response was electric. The pieces were unlike anything else on the market. They were bold, emotional, and unapologetically unique. An editor from Vogue Paris called them living sculptures. A powerful high-tech billionaire known for her iconoclastic style bought 3 pieces on the spot. Annalise was born. It was a quiet birth, but the shockwaves were beginning to spread. Up on Park Avenue, in a penthouse filled with perfect orchids and passionless jewels, the news was received first with derision, then with a flicker of annoyance. Grayson Vanderbilt read a small feature on the brand in a trade magazine and scoffed. His little ex-wife was still playing with her trinkets. He had no idea that the cornerstone of her new empire was the very stone he had tried to shame her with, and that the kingdom she was building was designed to cast a very, very long shadow. The growth of Annalise was not explosive. It was a slow, inexorable burn that grew hotter with each passing season. Isabel Moreau's strategy was masterful. They eschewed traditional advertising, focusing instead on strategic placements and cultivating an air of exclusive mystique. Annalise's creations began appearing in the wild, but only on the most discerning tastemakers. The first major coup came during awards season. A-list actress Scarlett Johansson, known for her sophisticated and slightly edgy style, eschewed the usual offerings from the heritage brands. On the Oscars' red carpet, she wore a single, breathtaking piece from Annalise, a cuff earring that climbed the length of her ear, crafted from warm yellow gold and featuring a cascade of honey-colored sphene, a gemstone known for its fiery dispersion, which Annalise had sourced from a small mine in Madagascar. It was a statement. The piece was discussed on every fashion recap, praised for its originality and artistry. When reporters asked who the designer was, Johansson smiled and said, "It's an Annalise. You wouldn't know her, yet." That single quote was worth more than a $10 million ad campaign. Suddenly, "It's an Annalise" became a whisper, a piece of insider jargon among the ultra-wealthy and the fashion-forward. The brand was no longer just a curiosity, it was a phenomenon. Forbes ran a feature titled, "The Alchemist of Soho, How Annalise Rosenthal is Turning Flawed Gems into High-Fashion Gold." The article touched upon her divorce, framing the cheap jewelry story, not as a humiliation, but as the brand's heroic origin myth. In the Vanderbilt sphere, the news was now impossible to ignore. Grayson first saw the Forbes article on his tablet while breakfasting on the terrace of his penthouse. His new partner, a woman named Cassandra Davenport, whose family fortune was in pharmaceuticals, slid the tablet back across the marble table. "Isn't that your starter wife?" Cassandra drawled, her voice smooth and polished. "How quaint, the alchemist of So. A bit dramatic for someone selling glorified arts and crafts. Don't you think?" Grayson forced a chuckle, but a knot of irritation tightened in his stomach. He remembered the necklace from the Met. He remembered its strange sunset-colored stone. He scanned the article, his eyes catching the valuation of her company, a speculative but nonetheless jarring number. "It's a fad. The fashion world loves a sob story. It will burn out in 6 months." But it didn't burn out. The waiting list for a bespoke Annalise piece grew to over a year. Annalise opened a second private salon in a secluded courtyard off the Rue Saint-Honoré in Paris, and a third in a discreet penthouse suite in Hong Kong. She was selective about her clients, cultivating a base of women who were leaders in their fields, artists, scientists, CEOs, and philanthropists. She wasn't just selling them jewelry, she was anointing them into a tribe. To own an Annalise piece was to signal that you had taste, individuality, and substance. It was a rejection of the kind of cookie-cutter luxury that the name Vanderbilt represented. The real shift in Grayson's perception came during Art Basel in Miami. He and Cassandra were attending the exclusive VIP preview, a sea of collectors and billionaires. Across the room, he saw an old business associate, a formidable German industrialist named Friedrich Hoffmann, talking to a woman. The woman was Annalise. She was not the timid, deferential creature he had known. She was poised, dressed in a simple but exquisitely cut black dress. Her only adornment, a pair of earrings made from raw geometric pyrite crystals set in gold. She was laughing, holding Hoffmann's attention completely. Then Grayson saw it. On the wrist of Hoffmann's elegant wife, Helga, was a bracelet. It was a massive cuff of hammered gold, centering a single enormous seafoam green tourmaline, the very one Annalise had bought in Antwerp, the one that looked like a frozen storm. It was magnificent, a piece of primal savage beauty. It made the flawless 10-carat diamond bracelet on Cassandra's wrist look sterile and predictable by comparison. "Is that?" Cassandra began, her voice tight with disbelief. "Helga, darling?" she called out, pulling Grayson along as she crossed the room, her smile a predatory slash of red lipstick. "What an absolutely savage bracelet. Who is the designer?" Helga Hoffman, a woman who was famously impervious to flattery, beamed with genuine delight. "Oh, it's an Annalise, of course. She designed it just for me. The stone's inclusions are meant to represent the turmoil of the Baltic Sea near our summer home. Isn't that brilliant?" She gestured toward Annalise. "Annalise, you remember Grayson, I assume?" The air crackled. Annalise turned her expression calm and unreadable. Her eyes met Grayson's. There was no fear, no anger, no pain. There was just a cool level assessment. It was the look one gives to a stranger on the subway. "Mr. Vanderbilt," she said, her voice even. "A pleasure to see you again. Cassandra." The politeness of it was more insulting than any barb. She had demoted him from a husband to a mere acquaintance. "Annalise," Grayson said, forcing a cordial tone. "Quite the little business you've built. I'm impressed." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "Thank you," she replied simply before turning her attention back to the Hoffmans. "Friedrich, you were telling me about the new Kiefer acquisition." She had dismissed him. In the heart of their world, surrounded by their people, she had effortlessly and completely dismissed him. He and Cassandra stood there for a moment suddenly, outsiders in the conversation. They were the ones left in the awkward silence. Later that night, back in their hotel suite overlooking the ocean, the facade crumbled. "This is ridiculous," Cassandra spat, unclasping her diamond bracelet and tossing it on the dresser. "Everyone was fawning over that woman, over her rocks and twigs. Helga Hoffman looked at my bracelet like it was from a department store. It's a bubble, Cass," Grayson said, pacing the room. But he didn't believe it anymore. He had seen the look in Friedrich Hoffman's eyes, deep respect. He had seen the genuine passion in Helga's face. Annalise wasn't selling jewelry. She was selling a new form of status, one that his money, his name couldn't easily buy. Worse, she was rewriting their history. In her narrative, he was the villain, the blind fool who cast out the princess and her magic stone. He was a footnote in her heroic rise. The thought was intolerable. The name Vanderbilt was supposed to crush others, not be a stepping stone for them. "Her success is an insult to us," Cassandra continued, her voice rising. "To your family. She's making a mockery of you, Grayson, and you're just letting her be." The question hung in the air, sharp and accusatory. He looked out at the dark ocean, his reflection a faint scowling ghost in the glass. Cassandra was right. This wasn't a game anymore. Annalise wasn't just an ex-wife with a lucky hobby. She was a rival whose very success was built on his failure of vision, on his moment of public cruelty. And a Vanderbilt does not tolerate a rival. "No," he said, turning from the window, his eyes cold and hard. "I'm not letting her." The irritation had now curdled into a dark, calculated resolve. It was time to remind Annalise Rosenthal what real power looked like. It was time to put the alchemist of Soho out of business. The first attack was subtle, a whisper campaign launched into the echo chamber of New York's high society. It began with Cassandra Davenport at a ladies' luncheon for the New York City Ballet. "I do worry about Annalise," she'd say to a table of influential women, her brow furrowed with faux concern. "She's working with such included stones. A friend in the industry told me she's essentially buying up other brands' rejects and marketing them as unique. And it's clever, I suppose, but is it honest?" The poison spread. Rumors began to circulate. Annalise uses inferior quality gems. The artisanal look is just a cover for poor craftsmanship. She's a one-trick pony whose fad is about to fade. These whispers were designed to erode the most valuable asset a luxury brand has: its integrity. Annalise and Isabel Moreau saw the dip in sentiment almost immediately. A handful of tentative inquiries were quietly withdrawn. A fashion blogger with close ties to Cassandra's social circle wrote a snide post questioning the true value of Annalise pieces. "This is Grayson," Annalise said, sitting across from Isabel in the Soho atelier. The city bustled below, but a chill had entered their sanctuary. This has his fingerprints all over it. He can't attack the success, so he's attacking the foundation. It's amateurish, Isabel replied, her fingers steepled, but effective in a small pond. We are not in a small pond. We ignore it. We rise above. Our work is our rebuttal. But Grayson was just warming up. When the whispers didn't work fast enough, he escalated. The second attack was a direct legal assault. Vanderbilt family lawyers sent a cease and desist letter to the Annalise headquarters. The claim was audacious trademark infringement. Grayson's legal team argued that Annalise's use of her own name, Annalise Rosenthal, was a deliberate attempt to trade on the goodwill and public recognition she had gained while married to a Vanderbilt. They demanded she rebrand her company. It was a ludicrous claim designed not to win in court, but to bleed her dry. A prolonged legal battle against a firm like Sullivan and Cromwell could bankrupt a young company, consuming time, resources, and morale. He's trying to bury us in paperwork, Isabel fumed after a conference call with their own lawyers. He knows he'll lose, but he'll make the process so painful that we'll be forced to settle or fold. Annalise, however, felt a strange surge of adrenaline. This was not a subtle whisper. This was an open declaration of war. Fine, she said, her voice steely. Let's fight. But we don't just fight in the courtroom. We fight in the press. Isabel's eyes lit up. A counter-offensive. They leaked the cease and desist letter to a sympathetic reporter at the New York Times. The resulting article was a bombshell. Vanderbilt heir attempts to strip ex-wife of her own name. The narrative was irresistible, the powerful old money patriarch trying to bully his self-made ex-wife. The story painted Grayson as petty and vindictive, and Annalise as a David fighting a corporate Goliath. Public opinion, especially among the professional women who formed her client base, swung decisively in her favor. Sales surged. The lawsuit became a marketing gift. Grayson was enraged. His attempt to exert power had backfired spectacularly, making him look both weak and cruel. He was chastised by his own father, Grayson Vanderbilt III, a man who valued discretion above all else. You made a public circus, son, the old man had rasped over the phone. You took a private matter and aired it on the front page. Handle it. Quietly. Humiliated and furious, Grayson decided to hit Annalise where she was most vulnerable, her supply chain. This was his world, the world of backroom deals, leverage, and corporate hardball. Through his family's network, he learned the names of the small independent mines and cutters Annalise cherished. The family that supplied her unheated lavender spinels from Burma. The Brazilian cooperative that sourced her unique storm-tossed tourmalines. He dispatched agents from the Vanderbilt global conglomerate. They didn't threaten. They made offers that were impossible to refuse. To the Burmese family, they offered to buy their entire output for the next 5 years, at double the price Annalise was paying, with a guaranteed distribution deal through a Vanderbilt subsidiary. To the Brazilian co-op, they offered funding for new modern equipment that would quadruple their yield in exchange for an exclusive contract. One by one, Annalise's lifelines were severed. She would call her contacts the people with whom she had built personal relationships, only to be met with apologetic, pained refusals. Annalise, I'm sorry. The offer was too good for my family to refuse. We had to think of our future. You understand? This blow was far more painful than the lawsuit. It was personal. Grayson wasn't just disrupting her business. He was colonizing her world, poisoning the very wells from which she drew her inspiration. The final, most crushing blow came from Antwerp. A venerable stone-cutting family, the Da Silvas, who had been instrumental in faceting her most unusual gems, sent her a formal letter terminating their relationship. They had signed an exclusive agreement with a newly formed luxury division of Vanderbilt Holdings. Annalise sat in her workshop, the letter in her hand, surrounded by sketches for a collection she could no longer produce. Her wellspring had run dry. The unique stones that were the soul of her brand were now being funneled directly into her enemy's hands. "He's not just trying to stop me," she said to Arthur Chadwick, who had come to sit with her amidst the crisis. "He's trying to become me." Arthur examined the letter. His old eyes, usually so kind, were now hard as flint. "He's a Vanderbilt. They don't create, they acquire. They see something of value, and they take it. But he's made a mistake. He thinks he's acquired your secret. He's bought your sources, your cutters. But he hasn't acquired your eye or your soul." And that evening, the industry trade publications announced the launch of a new high-end jewelry brand, Eterna, backed by Vanderbilt Holdings. Its creative director was Cassandra Davenport. Their debut collection, they announced, would feature a curated selection of the world's most unique and character-rich gemstones, a phrase lifted almost directly from Annalise's own press materials. Grayson had stolen her suppliers, her artisans, and her language. He was building a mimic, a hollow replica of her brand, but with the full weight of the Vanderbilt empire behind it. For the first time since leaving Park Avenue, Annalise felt a genuine stab of fear. She had built a beautiful, authentic kingdom. But a kingdom, no matter how beautiful, can still be starved into submission. The siege had begun. The launch of Eterna was as lavish as expected. Grayson spared no expense hosting a spectacular event at the Musée Rodin in Paris. Cassandra Davenport, draped in a massive seafoam green tourmaline necklace, cut from the same rough that Annalise had coveted, played the part of visionary creative director. The jewelry was technically proficient, the stones were magnificent, but to a discerning eye something was missing. The pieces were beautiful but soulless. They were like cover songs performed without any emotion. The designs were derivative, echoing the organic forms of Annalise, but lacking the narrative depth. It was a masterful imitation, but an imitation nonetheless. The market, however, is not always discerning. Backed by a relentless marketing budget, and the Vanderbilt name, Eterna, was an instant commercial force. They flooded magazines, sponsored events, and placed their jewelry on a new wave of influencers and actresses who were happy to take the Vanderbilt paycheck. They undercut Annalise on price, able to absorb losses that would have crippled a smaller company. Annalise's business began to feel the squeeze. Orders slowed. The buzz once hers was now shared with her corporate doppelganger. She and her team worked frantically, trying to find new sources, new stones, but Grayson's scorched earth campaign had been thorough. The niche suppliers of character-rich gems were now locked into exclusive contracts. Annalise felt cornered, the walls of her hard-won kingdom closing in. Desperation began to creep into the corners of the Soho atelier. One night, working late, she found herself staring at the framed GIA certificate for the Rosenthal chameleon, the cheap stone that had started it all. The anger and fear coalesced into a cold, hard resolve. "He's fighting a war of attrition," she said to Isabel in an emergency meeting the next day. "He thinks he can just outspend us until we die. We can't fight him on his terms. We can't win a war of resources." "So we changed the battlefield," Isabel said, her eyes glinting. "He thinks this is about jewelry. This is about... We need to find his weakness." "And what is that?" Annalise asked. "Every empire, no matter how grand, has cracks in its foundation," Isabel replied. "The Vanderbilt Empire is old, and old things can rot from within. We need to stop looking at Eterna and start looking at Vanderbilt Holdings." Isabel mobilized her own team of forensic accountants and corporate investigators, a discreet but lethal group she kept on retainer for just such occasions. For weeks they dug. They sifted through public filings, shareholder reports, and obscure trade journals, looking for leverage for a vulnerability. At first, the Vanderbilt empire seemed impregnable, a fortress of blue-chip stocks, real estate, and diversified assets. But then they found it, a small thread. Vanderbilt Holdings had heavily invested in a portfolio of shipping and logistics companies over the past decade. On the surface, it was a nod to their family's origins. But the numbers didn't quite add up. The profits reported by these subsidiaries were unusually high and consistent, almost impossibly so, given the volatility of the global shipping market. As Isabel's team dug deeper, pulling shipping manifests and cross-referencing them with customs data, a picture began to emerge. A picture of phantom cargo, of vessels listed as full that were sailing half empty, of fuel costs being artificially inflated in reports to shareholders. It wasn't just mismanagement. It was a sophisticated, long-running scheme to inflate the value of the division, securing larger and larger loans against these fraudulent assets. The Vanderbilt shipping empire, the bedrock of their modern fortune, was a house of cards. And at the center of it, the one who had overseen this aggressive expansion was Grayson Vanderbilt IV. He had used this fraudulently inflated division as the financial leverage to launch Eterna. "He's been cooking the books for years," Isabel said, sliding a confidential report across the table to Annalise. "He used the illusion of profit from his shipping division to fund the war against you. If this gets out, he won't just be humiliated. He could face SEC investigation, shareholder lawsuits, and even criminal charges. The Vanderbilt name will be dragged through the mud for a generation." Annalise stared at the report. Here it was, a weapon of mass destruction. She could leak it. She could destroy Grayson, his career, his family's reputation. She could obliterate Eterna and everything he had built. The thought brought a grim, satisfying sense of justice. It was an eye for an eye. But as she sat with the power to ruin him, a conversation she'd had with Arthur Chadwick echoed in her mind. He had come to her, his face grim, when he first heard of the Vanderbilt counteroffensive. "There's something you should know about the Vanderbilts, Annalise," he'd said, his voice heavy. "About Grayson's father. 40 years ago, I had a partner. We weren't just Chadwick and Sons, we were Chadwick and Bell. We had discovered a small but promising deposit of demantoid garnets in Namibia. It was to be our legacy. Grayson Vanderbilt III caught wind of it. He didn't make an offer. He used his financial power to squeeze our partners, fabricate a legal dispute over the mining rights, and bled us dry in court. He drove my partner, a good man, to bankruptcy and an early grave. He took our discovery, our legacy, for pennies on the dollar and sold it to a Russian conglomerate a year later. I lost everything but this small shop." Annalise had stared at him, stunned. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because my story was one of revenge," Arthur said, his gaze unflinching. "And I didn't want you to be driven by that. I wanted you to be driven by creation. But now you see the son is just like the father. They are takers. They see beauty, and they consume it. They cannot build it themselves." The revelation recontextualized everything. Arthur's mentorship wasn't just kindness. It was a quiet 40-year-old quest for justice. He had seen in her a chance to foster the creation that had been stolen from him. Looking at the damning report in her hands, Annalise understood the choice before her. She could leak it and become a destroyer, just like the Vanderbilts. Or she could use the information in a different way. Revenge was a fire that consumed everything, including the one who wielded it. She hadn't built her empire to burn someone else's down. She had built it to last. "We're not going to leak it," she said to Isabel, a steely calm settling over her. Isabel raised an eyebrow. "Annalise, this is a kill shot." "I know," Annalise replied, "but if we leak it, it becomes a chaotic public scandal. The SEC gets involved, the business gets tied up in litigation for years. It's messy, and it makes us look vindictive. There's a cleaner way, a more elegant way. He used financial power to try and crush me. I'm going to use financial precision to cripple him." She picked up her phone and dialed her corporate lawyer. "I have a new acquisition target in mind," she said. "It's a mid-sized logistics and customs brokerage firm based in Rotterdam. They're called Viridian Global. I want you to begin the process immediately, and I want it to be quiet." Isabel Moreau stared at her, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face as she understood Annalise's plan. It was brilliant. It wasn't a loud, messy explosion. It was a silent, perfectly executed checkmate. Annalise's counteroffensive was not a frontal assault. It was a masterpiece of corporate subterfuge. She didn't attack Eterna, she attacked its foundation. Working through a series of shell corporations set up by Isabel Moreau, she quietly acquired Viridian Global, a critical logistics firm controlling much of the operations at the port of Rotterdam. The day the deal closed, Viridian's new management issued a simple directive. All cargo from all clients was now subject to mandatory physical inspection. The effect on the Vanderbilt shipping division was immediate and catastrophic. The first of Grayson's ships to arrive was impounded when its manifest claiming high-value electronics was found to be a cover for a half-empty vessel filled with scrap metal. Within a week, his European shipping operations were paralyzed, his phantom profits replaced by real-world fines. As his credit lines froze and his father's fury rained down on him, Grayson scrambled to find the invisible force strangling his business. The answer arrived in 2 emails. The first contained a meticulously detailed report on 7 years of his financial fraud. The second contained a time and an address. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., the Soho Atelier. When Grayson walked into the light-filled sanctuary of the Annalise headquarters, he was a defeated man. Annalise stood waiting for him, the picture of calm control. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "My terms are not negotiable," she stated, her voice even and cool. "First, Eterna will be dissolved. You will transfer all its assets, including the inventory of stones you stole to me. You will pay all penalties. Second, Vanderbilt Holdings will make a substantial anonymous donation to a foundation I am establishing to support independent female designers. You will fund the very artists you sought to crush." She paused, letting the words land. "Finally, you will stay out of my world. If you ever interfere with my life or business again, this fraud report goes directly to the U.S. Attorney. Is that understood?" Defeated Grayson could only nod. He turned and walked out, a king dethroned in the quiet of his rival's palace. Months later at the Met Gala, where her humiliation had begun, Annalise stood as a co-chair of the event. She wore a simple gown, her only adornment, a new masterpiece of her own design, with the Rosenthal chameleon floating at its center, its sunset fire captivating all who saw it. Across the room, she briefly saw Grayson, a solitary figure on the fringe of a world that was no longer his. Their eyes met for a second. There was no triumph in her gaze, only the quiet finality of a war won. She had built her empire not on revenge, but on a foundation of undeniable worth. Annalise's journey wasn't just about revenge. It was a powerful testament to resilience, vision, and the radical act of defining your own worth when the world tells you that you have none. She transformed a moment of profound public humiliation into the cornerstone of a legacy, proving that true value isn't dictated by brand names or price tags, but by passion, authenticity, and an unwavering belief in oneself. Her story reminds us that the things others dismiss as cheap or flawed can often hold the most incredible world-changing potential. It's a lesson in looking closer, seeing the magic that others miss, and having the courage to build a kingdom from the stones they throw at you. What did you think of Annalise's ultimate checkmate? Was it more powerful than simply exposing him? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you were inspired by her incredible story of transformation, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of incredible triumphs.